Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us in our last session of the day on how can managing water in agriculture contribute to food security and public health. My name is Tala Awada. I am at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, the United States. I will be serving as the moderator for this session. With me is Dr. Mark Smith, the Director General for the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka. Mark will serve as a co-moderator and will facilitate the Q&A for the session. And without further delay, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Andre van Rooyen. Andre is the acting country representative in Ethiopia. He's serving as the principal scientist specializing in research programs on innovation systems at the Innovation Systems for the Drylands International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics. Andre will address this session's theme and will focus on evidence from Africa and propositions for further work. Andre, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation and the time. In the opening session, there was a lot of talk around the fact that the systems that we are talking about are really complex and therefore we require systems intervention. So I'm not gonna dwell much on that. We know that agriculture has got a lot of impacts on health, and a lot of people focus on the negative impacts on health, as we see in this study. And I'm not negating that these health issues are not real. But in this presentation, I would like to focus more on the positive side of things and to say, how can agriculture make a very positive contribution to human health? The multidimensional poverty index developed in Oxford is a very interesting way of looking at poverty and the multidimensionality of poverty. And that provides a very good introduction to this presentation because it encompasses the components of health, nutrition, and child mortality, education, which I will be talking a little bit about today as well. And then the more sort of normal ideas around poverty. So I would like us to think about if we want to work in agriculture with water, how do we address these three components to reduce multidimensional poverty? If we look at top left, it gives us an indication of the more sort of linear views on poverty, and we see that we're not doing too badly. Parts of Africa are still severely poor. But when we look at multidimensional poverty, top right, you'll see that the situation is far more dire when we also incorporate issues around education and human health within our analysis of poverty. Bottom left illustrates the international distribution of undernutrition, and we see that there are still some areas in Africa that suffer severely. And then I quickly want to draw your attention to bottom right, which illustrates the relationship between national wealth figures and the number of years that scholars spend at school. And we see that there's a very direct relationship between poverty and education. And I will come back to that a little bit later in my presentation. But on the next slide, it very clearly illustrates the impact of animal source foods on the cognitive development of children. And I included this slide particularly to illustrate the role that animal source food can play on the cognitive development of children. And in this very elegant study in which the scholars looked at the changes in test scores after a certain period of subjecting scholars to either of a nutritional supplement consisting of beef, of milk, a vegetarian diet, or the control group. And we can see that beef and milk had dramatic influences, positive influences on the test scores after about 9 months into this program. So the relationship between human nutrition and cognitive development is paramount. And again, I'll come back to that a bit later. So on the Congress website, there was a whole series of questions posed, and I'm not going to go into the details of these, but it really illustrates the questions that we pose to ourselves as to how do we reduce post-harvest losses, how do we increase access to nutritious food, what is the role of productivity, profitability of crops, et cetera, and then all the way to how do farmers increase their own situation, but also contribute to food sources in urban areas. So we conducted a study in Eastern Southern Africa funded by ACR, where we looked at the functioning of irrigation systems, and we had two levels of entry points. At the one level, we looked at innovation platforms or multi-stakeholder forums, where we brought all the stakeholders together to do deep-rooted analysis of what farmers and other operators thought were wrong with these systems. But we also introduced soil moisture and nutrient monitoring tools that allowed access to information to farmers to make decisions. So on the left, you see some really interesting work in which we worked with farmers to say, what are your current situation? How does that situation change, or how would you like it to change within the next 5 years? And people are able to articulate very clearly their aspirations or their visions for their schemes and how they want to get there. With the tools, we allowed farmers to make decisions based on the data that they got from the tools, but we never told farmers how to react to the information they got. They had to experiment themselves. And if you look at the third set of photographs, agriculture is hard work, and irrigating your plots take a lot of time, and it's backbreaking. But when the chameleon tells you that you don't have to irrigate, you actually save yourself a lot of time. And when you save yourself a lot of time and you don't over-irrigate and you retain nutrients within the root zone, your crop yields go up, as I will show you just now. But the important thing is that when yields go up and you can't sell those extra crops, then there's no incentive to change your behavior. So in this project, we worked all the way from farmers' aspirations, on-farm production, but also with markets ensuring that farmers got a return at the marketplace for their investments. So learning played a paramount role in this whole process of ours, where farmers were able to measure soil moisture and nutrients, make decisions as to whether they should irrigate the next time the water comes down the canal, or if it rains, is the soil wet enough? So through learning, they developed their own mental models and started innovating. And we've seen that many farmers have reduced the frequency of irrigation. Others started reducing less or smaller numbers of siphons, and they even irrigated for a shorter duration of time. So we saw tremendous savings of water because farmers learned to trust and believe the tools. And after a season or two, they also realized that the yields were going up because they were retaining moisture within the root zones. So there was this very, very strong component of learning. If you look at the graph on the left, the light shaded bar on the far left is the water productivity in 2 schemes in Zimbabwe before we started the study. And then 3-4 years later, the very dark bar on the right in Mkoba and Silalachane respectively illustrate the increase in the water productivity of those farmers who had access to tools. The middle bar are those farmers who did not have access to tools, but learned from those who had tools. So we saw again that there was a tremendous amount of learning, and farmers increased the water productivity and the yields. And the graph on the right illustrates that many farmers experienced significant increases in their yields, but also in income. And that's very important, as income is a major driver in this system. And when you look at what farmers have done with this income, you'll see that many farmers told us that they had more money to invest in agricultural inputs, to invest in education and food, and then in the bottom part of the multidimensional poverty index, to build houses and build assets. So we see that both farmers benefited from increasing their own yields and also the diversity of what they grew, but they were able to send kids to school and buy a greater diversity of food on the local market. So directly and indirectly, irrigation had a tremendous impact on food security and education. So we also saw, unexpectedly, like many complex systems will show this sort of strange behaviors. We heard that farmers started talking about reductions in conflict, and at the end of the project survey, we asked farmers, so what was the impact on conflict? And most farmers told us that they had a reduction in conflict within the household, because with increased levels of income, there were no quarrels around to whether we pay school fees or buy food. We saw that there were less friction between farmers within irrigation blocks, between upstream and downstream, and also less conflict between irrigators and other water users and managers of the system. So we had this multi-level impacts at various levels within the system, which we were able to unpack and develop a very interesting influence diagram. Now, we would never have been able to do this in the beginning of the project, but unraveling where the systemic changes took place, it was a very interesting exercise to build these influence diagrams. And we see that on the left in cycle A, the biophysical environment and the changes that we achieved there through information flows and changes in the way in which nutrients and water flowed through the system, it interacted very significantly with the cycle on the right, which is the socioeconomic markets input cycle. So the relationship between these things are critical if and when you want to achieve systemic impacts. So this is the kind of stuff that you often see in literature around moving away from sort of linear approaches to complex or systems thinking. And I'll very quickly go through them, where we need to focus on the interconnectedness of these subsystems and move from sort of linear approaches to more circle or the relationships. And instead of working in silos, we need to look at what are the emergence of these systems when you bring this stuff together. And instead of just analyzing the system, you work with the wholes and synthesize what you are doing. The important thing here is that to consider that when we deal with complex systems, the interactions between the components of these systems are often more important than the components themselves. So we need to look at the sort of relationships or the interdependencies between these major components within the systems. Like we've seen in the project, we need to intervene at various levels within the system. And again, during the opening session, people talk a lot about the sort of hierarchies and the different levels and cross-disciplinary work that needs to be done. And very specifically, when we look here at where we've gone through the sort of cycles within water work, we started talking about more crop per drop, and we started talking about nutritional water productivities. Some of us started talking about more income per drop. But I think when we're really talking about want to make transformational changes in the way we manage agriculture and water, we need to look at the diversity of food that we are producing from the water and the agricultural inputs that we make, because diversity is really what will bring both resilience, healthier systems, and then from a policy point of view, I think the days are gone where we have policies that look specifically at agriculture, the environment, or public health and education. We really need to integrate how we look at policies. How do these different areas or sectors come together? And instead of trying to work in isolation, bring these things together so that we can begin to look at larger systems rather than just components or technical interventions. So the last sort of question I would like to pose is, what are the trade-offs and the synergies within these investments between these subsectors? Subsequently, I added education to it. So it's the 4 subsystems that we need to look at. And I really think that for us to bring about transformational change in how we work with agriculture and how we achieve better health and education systems, we can no longer look at these in isolation. And I think that's the last slide. Thank you very much.
And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mark, to coordinate the Q&A.
Sure, thank you, Tara. Thank you, Andre. fascinating presentation, looking at how thinking about complex systems relates to irrigation and transformation and the broader questions around food systems. There's one question that so far has come in through the Q&A, and so I'll bring that to you, and then I've got a second question for you that I'd like to ask you myself. But first, we'll go to the question in the Q&A. This comes from Muhammad Abdi, who's talking about in Somalia, and he says that during rains there, you get 80 or 85% of the water is of the rainfall ends up in a flood and running off toward the sea, and creating environmental problems and not recharging groundwater and bringing the benefits that it can do so through groundwater recharge. So how would you, based on your wealth of experience, recommend tackling that problem?
In numerous of the irrigation schemes where we worked, especially those in Tanzania and in Zimbabwe, spoke a lot about catchment management and how do we bring together catchment management with irrigation water management. And I think that's paramount. It once again illustrates the interconnectedness of these systems. And we can no longer just look at irrigation as concrete infrastructure. It's a much larger system in which we have to draw the boundaries to capture the catchment areas and manage those much better. That's the short answer.
Sure, and making those connections across scales, which is sometimes a challenge. Exactly. So my question that I wanted to ask was, you, as I say, you've spoken very nicely about irrigation as a complex system, and you touched upon your work with agricultural innovation platforms. And I wondered if you could just expand a little bit on why agricultural innovation platforms are such a good tool for working with complexity and change in complex systems.
Sure, I can talk for a long time about that, but I think let me touch on 2 points very quickly. Often as scientists think that we got all the answers, and sometimes we're right, but quite often we're also wrong. But multi-stakeholder forums bring together what in the jargon is called cognitive diversity, and it's looking at problems from many, many different angles, and that often gets you to the root cause of these problems. But then also we've seen in Zimbabwe and in Tanzania that when you bring different stakeholders together, in Zimbabwe, we very clearly saw that the water authority realized where they were the bottleneck in the system. So you create spaces in which people often feel uncomfortable. And Zinwa used to switch off the water when the crops was at its most needful time so that farmers would pay for the water. But then they realized that they were the ones actually putting a stick in the spokes here, because they were the ones creating friction and conflict. And once we illustrated to them their role in helping us to increase productivity and yield so that farmers could get enough money to pay them, they were far more cooperative. So having people around the same table, understanding each other's reciprocal problems or how the interdependencies of these problems often help individual components of these systems to cooperate at a lot better level.
Great, thank you, Andre, and thank you again for that nice presentation to kick off this session. And I'll hand back now to Tala to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you again, Andre, for this very informative presentation. Next, we have our panelists who will each give 10-minute presentation. We will have time at the end of the session to address questions by the audience. Mark, my co-moderator, will again facilitate the Q&A. So first, we will hear from Fernando Riaza. He is from the Universidad Politécnico de Madrid. His title is Water as an Explanatory Factor for Food Security in Drylands, Development of a Composite Index. Thank you, Fernando, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Tala. And thank you, Andre. I think now my presentation is way more theoretical. So for me, it's such a pleasure to hear about practical examples and concrete results. So basically what we have done is, even if I work currently at the OECT, this work is done in the framework of the Polytechnic University of Madrid with my colleagues Irene, Paloma, and Joaquin. None of these numbers are new for you. As you know, hunger numbers are on the rise. The population is still increasing. Climate change is here to stay. The water consumption is increasing twice the rate of the population in the world. However, the clean and fresh water is diminishing. So COVID is also here to exacerbate most of these factors. So this is why I consider this study to be quite timely. So the objective is basically we thought that the prevalence of undernourishment, the indicator developed by FAO, was capturing the consequences of hunger. But we thought, what about the causes, like what was before? So we thought about developing a composite indicator, trying to capture what was the relevance of water-related factors in dryland countries. We chose 36 countries in Africa and Asia. Africa and Asia, mostly because 70% of the drylands in the world are located in these continents. The frame of the project is within the European Commission Horizon 2020 Map for Water project, and to develop the composite indicator, we had to take the expertise from 54 people highly qualified in this field of knowledge from the action cost, drylands facing change. The data was obtained from large databases from international organizations as FAOSTAT, Aquastat, and so on. So basically the methodology, as for any other composite indicator, we started with literature review, and then we defined the geographical boundaries. For this step, what we did was to read a report from the IPCC of 2019, where the aridity index was coupled with the political borders. So we basically consider that every country that has a significant piece of land with drylands was taken into the study, and then the indicator identification was based on two steps. First, with the classification done by FAO, the 4 dimensions: use, access, stability, and affordability. And the second step was done with the studies from Sullivan and Scardino, previous studies in the past. And in this second step, what we did was to introduce the water dimension into this indicator. Then we proceed to do some data manipulation. We did a standardization to be able to compare the values. We applied the weight that came from the 54 experts, and we basically did the calculation, the mapping. So these were the results from the survey. On the right, the value is actually a normalization of the values to up to 1. So we could compare the relevance of each indicator towards the food security. And some of the highlights that I could say in these 10 minutes will be that 3 out of the 5 top weighted indicators were water related. Total water resources per capita is highly voted. And even while water stress was also very high, municipal water withdrawal ranked very low. And this is what we capture, is that this indicator was not giving a good sense of what would be the benefits and the cons of having a higher share of municipal water withdrawal within our region. So this will be a result of one of the maps that we developed. Here is only one. This is for Africa, 2015. We have every indicator, and the darker the blue, the more relevant it is regarding the food water security index. The final goal of this is basically to get a sense of whether our indicator can be comparable to prevalence of undernourishment, which is the usual indicator used in this kind of environments, and if we're actually adding any value to it. So in the case of this is Asia. So what we see here is basically that Asia did great improvements. In this slide, I couldn't add the change between 2000 and 2015, but I wanted to show both maps. Afghanistan is by far the country with lowest levels of food security. Mongolia and Uzbekistan are performing well. So we're actually going country by country with our new indicator that now is adding the water dimension in a greater scale and trying to see what are the differences between 2000 and 2015. In the case of the most positive success stories, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and China, and only 3 countries in Asia actually gave negative values, Syria, Mongolia, and Saudi Arabia. So what are the overall trends? Well, 62% of all the countries that we analyze, that are 36, decrease their insecurity. So it means that they are performing better nowadays. Well, in 2015. Africa, even if they actually had the best countries performing, they also had the worst ones. So the evolution was quite asymmetric and was not very homogeneous. And we actually think that this might be a result of the political stability of the continent that had negative effects on certain countries. 5 countries remaining stable over this period of years: Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, and Oman. On the other hand, Asia evolved in a more stable way, and only 3 countries, as I mentioned before, gave negative. So while Africa reduced from 0.62 to 0.59, the values of Asia reduced from 0.53 to 49. So it's 0.1 smaller than Africa, which is consistent with the results of hunger and intensity of undernourishment. So, well, for discussion, just to mention that this theoretical framework is trying to capture whether the results that we analyze in the theoretical world are actually real and have a translation into the real world. Arable land equifortification, as was mentioned before by Andre, has turned out to be the most relevant indicator, and that is consistent as well with the literature. Total renewable resources per capita is also a key element to avoid malnutrition. Political instability has weighed down many African countries. And when we compare the prevalence of undernourishment and the food water security index, we had a result in the Pearson coefficient of 0.5, which is moderate. It's not extremely high, it's not low, it's moderate. I think it's a good direction. It means that actually one explains the other, and the results are correlated, which is good. Now we are on the second phase of this work. We are trying to be more accurate and be more sharp when treating the values. We are applying a new methodology to avoid the outliers in the data set. We are trying to find a new way to visualize the results. So we are on this process that we want to finish along the summer. We hope to publish sometime soon. Just to last conclusion, I think that there's a potential for replication of this study. This methodology, I think, can be applied to other places. I will finish with this, and I will give back the floor to you. The last slide is just my contact in case anyone feels like contacting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Mark?
No questions on the board.
Fernando, I have a question for you. Can we overlay the climate change models or simulation models and predict where instability might occur into the future? Or have you thought of this? Or for instance, once the climate change over a few years, do we see recovery?
Yes, thank you, Dala. That's a very good question. We are actually on this second phase of the study. What we have introduced is 2005, 2010, and we expect maybe to get 2020, but I don't think it's going to happen, as the data availability for African countries and Asian is not very robust. So what we're trying, including 2005 and 2010, is actually to capture whether there are significant changes in the values, especially those that are related to climate change, that can actually explain better some of the changes in the overall composite indicator. So we try to capture climate change. It's not easy. I have run some correlations with precipitations, with temperature deviations. It's not as clear as I will hope it is. I think that there are ways to analyze that. We're on the way to do it. That's why we're trying to make the data set larger and to get better results and more accurate.
Thank you, Fernando. So if we don't have any more questions, we can move to our next speaker, Guwahati Naik, and she will be talking about water, energy, food nexus, and energy in irrigation in India, externalities and its impacts on food security, water security, and public health. Guwahati is a PhD candidate at the SOAS University of London. It's all yours, Guwahati.
Thank you, Tala. Am I audible? Thank you organizers for providing me this wonderful opportunity to interact with you all and its impact on. Please.
Sounds like your internet connection is running slow. Your audio keeps cutting out.
Yes, I face this problem. Am I audible now?
Yes, but you keep cutting out.
Hello?
There is a dial-in option if you need to switch to phone audio. Guwahati, now that your camera's off, go ahead and try talking, see if that helps.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, you're coming in clearer now.
Oh,
thank you.
All right. Thank you. So India is the most groundwater reliant and the most exploiting country in the world. In this groundwater exploration and exploitation, role of subsidies is very crucial. Why subsidies are provided the subsidies are provided by the government in order to promote food security of the small and marginal scale farmers, and to ensure the food security of the whole nation. So these subsidies were in existence since the independence in 1947, but it became strengthened during 1970s when the Green Revolution was introduced in the country. So this Green Revolution was a kickstart of the agricultural boom, as well as it turned to be a revolution for groundwater exploration, which later turned to be an exploiting factor of this hidden resource. So the government supported agriculture through heavy subsidies in the form of credit, irrigation, power, seeds, or market. So we can say that there is a subsidy from inputs to outputs for helping the farmers to boost agricultural production in the country. So overall, this aim is to ensure food security, and especially if we take into consideration the concept of irrigation subsidies, it enables food security through water security. So these subsidies has created a nexus. I'm using the triology energy, water, food nexus. Why I'm using this energy, water, food nexus, I'll explain it in the next slides consequently. So this has an impact on public health, which I'm exploring through this paper. Actually, this is a paper which evolved as a part of the field work, which I have done during my ongoing PhD research. So this is an evolving paper. So I would like to invite your comments, feedback, and criticism, which will help me to frame this paper in a more revised way. So I'm exploring this nexus created by the subsidies and its impact on food and water security, as well as the food security. As I said, what was the need for subsidies? It was actually to help the small scale farmers to access the natural resources like water, and also to access the government aid, because in India, the farmers, there are a lot of small scale and marginal farmers who cannot afford modern technology. So the subsidies are a boost or a tool to help them to access all these resources. And also the distributive justice, the element of distributive justice is hidden in these type of policy mechanisms. And the Constitution of India calls upon the state to promote agriculture. And also this constitution is based on the concept of distributive justice. So they want to bring equity and justice in all these natural resource access, so that people can ensure food security. Then the inequity in accessing natural resources can be addressed. Poverty and unemployment, which was rampant during the independence time, could also be addressed. And the primary aim was actually to reduce the food imports and to make India to promote self-sufficiency in food generation. So the Green Revolution was introduced in 1970s, targeted food security of the nation, and for the same, government helped the farming communities through the subsidies. So even now, the subsidies are ongoing mechanism, even though there is a discussion, which we all know, with respect to WTO on the differentiation between amber box subsidies and green box subsidies. But still, subsidies are a burden on the exchequer of the state in India. But it is a very crucial factor for the promotion of agricultural sector in the country. So here I'm going to discuss about the irrigation subsidies, but I'm not going to detail about irrigation subsidies, but I'm focusing on the energy subsidies and the link which is created by these energy subsidies. Irrigation subsidies can be, it's given for accessing surface water supplied by the state through canals and groundwater access. Groundwater is actually the exploration of groundwater is actually an individual initiative, but in order to promote this individual initiative also, there are subsidies. So the most important subsidy in this irrigation is the energy subsidies. Earlier, the subsidies were granted for diesel pumps, but later on, with the electrification of rural areas, electricity subsidies took place of these diesel subsidies. So this contribution of groundwater to irrigation being huge and India being the largest exploiter, this involvement of subsidies in groundwater development as well as exploration is very significant and it demands attention. So the energy subsidies, electricity is a state subject under the Constitution. So each state has different policies on energy, but the common factor for all the states is that energy is supplied free of cost or at cheaper rates for agriculture. So with this, and now the central government has introduced solar-based subsidies. So this is a scheme of distribution of subsidies for solar pumps. So there are subsidies for electricity as well as solar pumps. So this energy subsidies has created a nexus. That means the energy, water, food nexus. Why I am using this trilogy is because by using the free energy or free electricity, this subsidized electricity has enabled farmers to access more groundwater. So that has created a link between energy and water for irrigation. So by ensuring a sustainable irrigation for agriculture, this energy water nexus is all created. But the third factor, that is a result of the first two factors, energy, water, which has generated food security of the country. So there is a link which has been generated from the very beginning of energy, water, and food. So if the subsidies were absent, then definitely there would have been inequity. And this has been understood from the field work which we have done in the states of Rajasthan and Kerala and some of the other places in India as well. So poverty and unemployment were on increase. So subsidies has helped to address some of these elements to an extent by ensuring equity in accessing government aids. The Green Revolution was introduced in the northwestern states like Punjab, UP, Haryana, Gujarat, and Rajasthan. So these states are called the Green Revolution belt states, where these subsidies has enabled the farmers to access groundwater, but at the same time, these states are now presently undergoing a crisis, groundwater crisis, where the level of groundwater exploitation is so rampant that almost all the zones are red listed. They are already overexploited. So even in the dry state of Rajasthan, where groundwater dependency is more, these subsidies, although being a relief to the small scale and marginal farmers, has contributed to the exploitation of groundwater resources. In addition to these irrigation subsidies, energy subsidies, there are subsidies for fertilizer and pesticides. So this is augmenting the benefits of groundwater-based irrigation. There are bumper crops which are being produced. Now, India is self-sufficient in food generation. We are exporting crops. So these factors are there, and subsidies has enabled to ensure the food security. In Kerala is a state where there is surface water and groundwater abundance. So there is no problem of exploitation, but subsidies has created an issues of quality depletion, not the quantity depletion. So coming on to the subsidies and the link with public health. As I said, energy, water, and food nexus has been created by these energy subsidies. So this has been explored by many scholars in their works, but its impact on public health, how it has created an impact on public health, as well as its impact on ecosystem is yet to be explored. So that requires more attention from the scholars. If you ask me why, if I have generated a concept like, it's not a concept, but a way to explain. If the excessive use of energy subsidies, say, for example, free electricity, has enabled to access deep aquifers, groundwater exploitation is the result, which has caused the water tables to be fallen, and groundwater is critically exploited in many parts of the state. So more reliance, more problems has been created. So with rising demands for food and water secure water, the rise to dig deeper has been augmented. So which has created influx of chemicals and pesticides into the deeper aquifers, creating quality as well as the quantity depletion problems in case of groundwater. So energy subsidies plus fertilizer subsidies in the irrigation, in agriculture, has caused groundwater depletion. So here, groundwater depletion includes both quantity as well as quality. Free electricity has created, because of the exploitation, the influx of chemicals and pesticides, chemical fertilizers and pesticides has polluted groundwater. So the result of this groundwater pollution is yet to be explored. Like groundwater being a hidden resources, the pollution of groundwater is not that much visible like that of surface water. This is a problem to understand about the impact of subsidies on the public health. But there are incidences like fluorosis in many parts of India. For example, in the district where I have done field work, in one of the districts called Alappuzha, there are I'll be quick. So the last point which I want to make is, for example, there was an issue of groundwater exploitation in this place called Plachimada, where the Coca-Cola company exploited groundwater extraction. So even though the company is closed, the case is now closed, but the impacts of polluted water on health and ecosystem is yet to be explored. So the subsidies has created a link between this groundwater exploration and exploitation, but its impact on health and ecosystem needs to be explored in the public policy and laws. What the ways forward is to analyze there should be a interlink between science and policy in the policy framework, which is presently absent, particularly in case of groundwater law, which are not adequate to address the closer interlink between this energy, water, food nexus and its overall impacts on public health and ecosystem. So this demands an interface between science and policy to address the impacts of energy subsidies induced water quality issues. So unless this law and policy addresses it, leaving the fragmented approach, the presently fragmented approach, it's unable to address the whole public health concerns created by the quality depletion of groundwater. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayatri. We will have time in the end to answer questions. I'm going to introduce now our next speaker, Ricardo Tori, he is from the EG team, Engineering Geology Consultants. His presentation is titled Hydrological Assessment Approach for the Elaboration of the Hydro-Agricultural Infrastructure Project aimed at development of mangrove rice cultivation in Guinea-Bissau.
Thank you, Tala. Thank you very much, Tala, to introduce me. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being here today. Thanks to the scientific committee to having me and to give me the opportunity to present the work we are doing in Guinea-Bissau. This work is part of the Yanda Guinea European program supporting the improvement of mangrove rice cultivation in Guinea-Bissau. The program has started in 2019, and the project is managed by LVA, an Italian NGO, which is based in Guinea-Bissau since 1986, with a strong knowledge and competence in that area. And it is supported by AG Team, an Italian consultant firm, having over 20 years of experience in design and construction of civil and hydraulic works, water management and land management. In order to ensure the success of the project, the Engineering and Rural Development Agency, linked to the Ministry of Agriculture for Guinea-Bissau, was involved as an associated partner. More in the detail, this work aims to increase the presence of durable and low-need maintenance civil and hydraulic infrastructures, ensuring both ease of access to the paddy field and the creation of an improved system for water management. Last but not least, the program promotes a real participatory approach in which all choices are shared at all stages with communities and producers. Guinea-Bissau is one of 10 countries in the world with the highest per capita rice consumption. Rice cultivation is practiced by 90,000 small producers, among whom 22,000 produce mangrove rice. The mangrove paddy fields is essentially a land stolen to the sea by construction of a belt of small earth dams, with the aim to control and mainly prevent saltwater inflow and allowing the irrigation and the leaching processes of the soil by freshwater inflow. The study was developed in the Encheia district along the Mansoa River, where the climatic and the environmental conditions are prone to mangrove rice growth. The site is located around 25 kilometers northwest of Bissau, 100 kilometers far from the main coast, where, however, the tidal effect is still strong. The hydrological basin is drained by the Ingwam River, and the alluvial plan represents a paddy field of about 1,700 hectares. For the development of agricultural activities, the producers are asking the improvement of the hydraulic infrastructures finalized to the water management at the basin scale. The working team was built taking into account three main aspects: the socio-economical context, the complex hydrological framework, and the actual availability of technological means of the local companies for construction. The workflow was developed planning the three classical design phases. In the first step, a general feasibility study was carried out. In the second step, a preliminary design was defined, and the executive design of the hydraulic works was finally carried out in the third step. We have to take in account that the time schedule for design steps and construction phase has been strictly fixed according to the seasonal trend of the rainfall to ensure the access to the sites for working. In the very first step of the project, only few climatic and hydrological data have been found. Well, as foreseen, we worked with data collected directly on the field or downloaded by the web. The analysis of the watershed obviously needs a large scale of topographical large scale. And we have chosen to use an high definition DTM built from satellite imageries. This is to draw the complex net of channel and small dams and to compose all the thematic maps. A specific field survey has been carried out in order to verify the morphology of the basin and to identify the most critical area according to the agronomic needs and social constraints. During this step, we also began to collect the data for the evaluation of the tidal effect over the basin, and climate change impact over the area has been defined according to the IPCC projection for 2100 horizon in Guinea-Bissau. The preliminary design results allowed to define the actions to pass to the executive design, and two main phases have been highlighted. In the first one, the works will be realized directly by the producers, who are able to conduct the earthworks, mobilizing several teams of specialized workers in the rehabilitation of all existing infrastructures. The second phase concerns the final design of the main infrastructures, and namely, in the upper part of the basin, the Klonk-Klak Dam allows the subdivision of the Ingwan Basin into two sectors with different agronomic needs. Its final design has been finalized in September 2020, and the works are in progress. In the lower part of the basin, it is foreseen the reorganization of the hydraulic knot of Comuni in order to avoid the current erosion pattern, which prevent the optimal use of the water resource. Its final design is currently in progress. The most evident critical issue to pass from preliminary to executive design was the lack of hydrological and geotechnical data. Concerning the geotechnical framework, specific site and laboratory investigations have been carried out. And regarding to the hydrological settlement of the basin, the evaluation of the key factors has been made by correlation to data coming from basin with similar characteristics, and by an analysis of sensitivity of the estimated parameters in order to balancing the possible errors. According to the preliminary design step, the earth dam of Klonk-Klak also works as a road link between the villages standing on the opposite slopes of the valley. It is equipped with a concrete hydraulic gate, which allows to manage the flows upstream and downstream. The hydraulic level were fixed considering both the water level useful for the rice cultivation and the maximum rising level of the tidal. Well, the conclusions, at the present stage of the works, we can consider that this is a real case of design and construction of hydraulic works designed with the aim of providing better technological tools that allows their sustainability in both short and long terms. In short term, the typology of the works allows their operative and maintenance according to the technological constraints of a developing country as Guinea-Bissau. In long term, the works sizing was verified considering the effects of current and future climate changes. One of the main purposes of the project was to transfer the workflow model and the method to the local stakeholders. After 2 years of work, the main difficulty stands still on the transfer of the technological know-how to the local fellows and engineers. This is mainly due to the difficulty of finding technological material on site and the difficulty of providing effective training. In this sense, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have certainly played a significant role. On the other hand, the solutions proposed by the final design seem to fit the technological level of the local construction companies. In the very end, for the cost of the infrastructure also are well balanced in relation to the specific socioeconomical framework. Well, that's all. Thank you for your attention.
And next, we have our next speaker has not been able to join us, Tobago Keletso. And with that, we'll move to our last speaker, Henning. She's from the Cluster of Competency, Health and Environment at the Moulay Ismail University at Meknes, Morocco. Her talk is on health risk assessment based on pesticide monitoring in Sais Plain, Morocco groundwater. Iman?
So hello everyone, do you hear me? Can I start? So hello everyone. First of all, Allow me to thank on my personal name all the organizing committee. So I'm Iman Berni, postdoc researcher at Moulay Ismail University of Morocco. My presentation will be about health risk assessments based on pesticide monitoring in sage plant groundwater in Morocco. This work is a part of EUC program between Moulay Ismail University in Morocco and Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. So in Morocco, pesticides are used extensively with an increased import value growing at an average annual rate of 10%. This doesn't reflect the real impact since we still have an important counterfeit market involving pesticides that are normally banned in Morocco. So this massive use of this chemical compound is at the root of many environmental and health problems. In terms of health, exposure to pesticide can trigger a variety of chronic health diseases like cancer, and in environmental terms, only 0.3% of the pesticide used to reach the targets. More than 89% are found in the environment. Our study area is Seysplan. Seysplan is located between Fez and Meknes city in north center in Morocco. The study area is a non-intensively agricultural region where pesticides are extensively used to boost agricultural productivity. So in this context, the aim of our study is to perform human health risk assessments based on the monitoring of pesticides in sage groundwater in Morocco using passive sampler devices. To achieve this objective, a survey was conducted with 132 farmers and 232 applicators using a structured questionnaire. So the questionnaire included first section related to basic information about the interview, like gender, age, and the practices of pesticide application and the pesticide can use it. And the second section is designed to evaluate the level of awareness of the danger of pesticide and their strategy of phytosanitary practices. Furthermore, some observations were made during storage and mixture and application of pesticide in the field. The results of the social and demographic characteristic is described in this table. So briefly, more than 11% of the interviewed farmers were lower than 30 years old, and about 98% were men and about 21% were illiterate. The phytosanitary products used in Seysplan belong mainly to 5 major chemical families, which is organophosphate, carbamate, organochlorine, pyrethroid, and triazine. The most commonly used pesticide in the study area are deltamethrin and DuPont 4D. We note that the use of organochlorine like endosulfan and some organophosphate like paration, ethyl, and methyl, although illegal, has been reported in the study area. The map showed the total quantity of pesticide. It ranges from 3 to 11 kilograms per hectare, depending on the county. So the results of the survey served as a basis for selecting a sampling set where passive samplers were deployed. In this context, 2 passive samplers were used, named POSIS A and POSIS B. The passive samplers were prepared in the field and deployed in 22 wells during 3 weeks. After the period of deployment, both passive samplers were retrieved and transported to the laboratory for extraction and analysis with LC-MSMS and GC-MS. So in parallel, human health risks were assessed using hazard quotient model based on the measured concentration of pesticide in groundwater and other parameters. So the results of the analysis of pesticide and their metabolites in groundwater using a passive sampler show that among 28 compounds and their metabolites, researcher 22 compounds found in summer company and 17 compounds were detected in winter company. The comparison between both companies showed that the most identified pesticide presents important seasonal and spatial variation Also, organochloride compound contributed the most to the total pesticide burden in South Plains in Morocco. The human health risk for people who use this water as a drinking water showed that hazard risk was important for anti-HCH, DDT, and DDE, suggesting that exposure to pesticide of drinking groundwater poses a risk to infant, children, and adults. To conclude, so the combination between the use of passive samplers as an analytical approach of pesticide monitoring and human health risk assessment is an effective approach to suggest mitigation measure. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, you can check our paper or contact me in my email. And thank you.
Thank you, Iman. And I would like to thank all our presenters that through their research have demonstrated once again the importance of water for food security, for societal, economic, and political stability and human health. I'm going to turn it over now to Mark to coordinate the Q&A session. We have a few minutes left in this session for Q&A.
Great, thank you, Tala. I've got no questions written in the Q&A box, so if any of our audience have a question that you're dying to ask our speakers, please just pop it in the Q&A box and then I can relay it to the speakers. Maybe I'll just try and open the questions with one initially for Gayatri. You spoke about the nexus, which is complicated in itself, and then how we need also to consider public health impacts alongside that. And I'm wondering, as you are undertaking your studies and your research, what you're starting to see as really some of the policy levers that are available or that need to be explored perhaps to address public health impacts of the kinds of subsidies that you described to us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, the water energy water food nexus is very complicated. But the public health impacts, so far the literature which I have referred, as well as the work which I have done on this field has helped me to understand that there is a lack of literature, a lack of work which has done to study about the impacts of the subsidies on public health. We have been discussing about the impacts or the financial burden which is created by the subsidies and its impact on the water quantity depletion, but not the quality depletion. So what I try to argue is that even as you asked me about the public policy or the law which is presently existing in the country, these laws, especially the groundwater law in the country, is fragmented and it's following a piecemeal approach. For example, in India, we follow a federal system. So each state has, water is a state subject. I mean, each state has to make laws. Unfortunately, the most groundwater exploiting states like Punjab and Rajasthan lack groundwater laws. So if you don't have a law to address these issues of groundwater exploitation itself, I mean the quantity depletion itself, there's no point of discussing about the quality depletion. So there won't be any scope for discussion. So I'm opening up the venue for more discussion, and I'm arguing for more interlink between the science and policy to understand the interlink between the science and policy in the legal framework so that we can address the public health impacts created by subsidies. So that is my argument. We need more work on the same to understand the impacts. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, no, that makes good sense. Thank you. Maybe I'll throw a question over to Ricardo now. I was struck, Ricardo, by what you described for us was, as you had said, was a technical design for this infrastructure, infrastructure related to rice production. And I was thinking back to Andre's presentation, where he talked about the complexity of processes of change around irrigation systems. And I'm wondering the extent to which in your design process in Guinea-Bissau, the constraints on implementation of the technical design are apparent. So perhaps the social constraints, the institutional constraints, and then how the program is addressing those.
I'm sorry, I lost the last part of the question.
The extent to which the kinds of social and institutional constraints
Yes.
that Andre's presentation touched upon are apparent in the design process that you are undertaking in Guinea-Bissau.
Yes, there is the technical design was completely shared with the local communities and the local administration. So it's clear that we choose how to build the very technical part. For example, about the foundations of the infrastructures. We proposed technological solutions because of the quality of the, for instance, the quality of the terrains of the soils are very bad. And it is very difficult to approach a final design without taking into account the last technical solutions. For sure, this is one of the problems. It is difficult to approach the choice of a technological solution. For instance, to design and construct the foundation of a concrete of the concrete part of the dams to the rice producers. Well, we try to do it. We organized a lot of meeting on the field, and we shared even the most technical solution with them. We also come back on our steps because the producers gave us new issues, new items to rethink the design.
Good, thank you. Tala, if you also have any questions, please just step in. We have one question that's come up also also for you, Ricardo, I guess, because it's about Guinea-Bissau, asking, I don't know how relevant this is, but you can tell us whether in this system there's been any applications of vetiver grass in the system.
Yes. You asked me how to manage the weeds on the is that I didn't understand well. I'm sorry.
The question is not very clear as it's expressed in the written on the board here, but I think it's to do possibly with soil conservation in the system. So the extent of using vegetation cover for soil conservation in the system, whether that's relevant.
Yes, yes, for sure. We forecasted to there is a part of the design which improved the use of vegetation and reforestation to maintain the soil and to avoid the erosion patterns, for example. Yes, it's not just a design of infrastructures, but there is also a part which forecasts a reforestation and the use of grass to maintain the soils. I hope to give an answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just going to Iman now. In terms of the work that you showed us on impacts of pesticide pollution on public health, what are some of the interventions that you're looking at in Morocco to reduce these the contamination by pesticides and then the impacts on public health? Maybe Iman, you could elaborate a little bit on that.
And apologies, Mark, it looks like we've lost Iman.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. So maybe I think maybe I'll hand back to you, Tala. I think we've probably used up the questions.
All right, thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone again for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists and all the audience that stayed with us till, depending on where you are, late in the evening.